Hello and welcome to the Action Network podcast UFC betting preview for UFC 308. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward to help you break down all 13 fights. Well, maybe not all 13 fights for UFC 308, but our best bets for UFC 308 going down at 10 a.m. Eastern time in Saudi Arabia on Saturday. So make sure to get those bets in early. 13 fight card, prelim start at 10 a.m. Eastern. Main card starts at 2 p.m. Eastern. The main event, the featherweight title bout between undefeated Ilia Topuria and Max Blessed Holloway. Topuria currently about a minus 240 favorite. Holloway best odds available about plus 210. The over 3.5 rounds juiced at minus 120 to the over. I think I have a little bit more of a definitive take on this fight than Billy. I like the goes to decision at plus 150. I also like Topuria by decision at plus 285, but this to me is the prime example of betting numbers and not having a preconceived notion of how you're going to bet the fight going in. Because after Holloway's fight against Gaethje, I was planning on betting Topuria either by submission or by knockout in this fight, anticipating that I might get better odds on Topuria to knock out Max Holloway than I did against Alex Volkanovski, who was coming off of a knockout loss against Islam Makhachev when he fought Topuria. However, Topuria was plus 350 to KO Volk. He's plus 210 to KO Holloway, who not only has never been knocked out in his career, has only been knocked down once by Justin Gaethje. And I thought there might be a chance coming off of that Gaethje fight. Maybe the chin is finally starting to crack for Holloway. And maybe it is, but I can't bet into it at these numbers. I'm not betting plus 210 on Ilia Topuria to knock out one of the most durable fighters in the history of the promotion. Plus 50, 550 by submission, maybe a little bit more interested. I think Topuria's grappling skill is overall underrated. But getting plus 150 on the goes to decision in a division where the average fight goes to decision 54% of the time, we've seen decreased knockouts with these newer gloves. I think we're starting to get somewhat more sufficient of a sample. It's not just the math showing that there's fewer knockouts. Even when the knockouts are coming, they're like one-sided beatdowns or like attritional knockouts. Billy, you can speak more to that too. We're seeing fewer of these like one-shot guy goes down cold, out cold KOs. I think there is something of a difference with these new gloves. We're just not seeing like the flash KOs that we used to. Even the Joaquin Buckley knockout versus Stephen Thompson, like Thompson didn't fully go out. He like crumpled over, but he wasn't the typical knockout that we're used to seeing. So I do think with these different gloves, Topuria's knockout power may be a little bit diminished. Certainly helps the Holloway side. Now, the only time Topuria has been tested over 5 rounds, had to push a pace, was against Josh Emmett. He was really able to take his foot off the gas down the stretch. Didn't even really go for the finish in that fight, even though he was winning 10-8 rounds. I think Max could potentially push a pace, get this fight close, get it to the later rounds, and steal a decision. I think Topuria has vastly more finishing upside. I think he is the better grappler, has all of the grappling upside, and I think that's why he's the justified favorite where he is. I also think Max is a very public underdog this week. People are picking him to win this fight between 40 and 66% of the time from the data sources I pull stuff from. So I think Topuria is the clear value side from a money line perspective. I know it's weird to say that against Max Holloway when Topuria is already out to minus 240, but it seems like there is an abundance of public action on Holloway. So I would either parlay up Topuria, play his money line up to minus 250 or pass, but I like the goes to decision at plus 150. And I like Topuria by decision at plus 285. I would probably project those closer. I'd project the goes to decision closer to a coin flip. I'd make Topuria by decision closer to plus 185. Billy, I think if you were going to place a bet on this fight, you would lean to the goes to decision as well. However, that is not an exciting bet to place on a fight like this. And this fight is exciting enough on its own merits to justify not betting on it at all and just tuning in for the enjoyment.
Yeah, as we've discussed, I've been fully convinced I was going to bet one guy or the other at multiple different points this week. And finally, I just kind of threw it in. It's like, okay, if you really are bouncing back and forth that much, probably the correct answer is not to bet it. I really like what you pointed out about the gloves. I thought when they announced these new gloves, there's apparently, an ounce and a half less padding or something.
Yeah.
We'd see more knockouts. Been the total opposite. Ran across a pretty good Twitter thread the other day with some of those numbers broken down, but it's stark. It's still a small sample size. That's important, but obviously Holloway doesn't get knocked out. His only finish loss ever was in 2012 by submission to Dustin Poirier in Holloway's UFC debut. Since then, no one's finished him. I like the grappling upside from Ilia. The thing that's keeping me from not betting him is he's talking all this. He wants to point down in the center of the cage. He
Hmm.
wants to get in the kind of fight that favors Holloway. And he has just enough confidence that I'm almost worried he's going to work against his best interest
Too
and try
much
to get
ego,
into a.
right?
Yeah, and it's the one guy you don't want to do that with at featherweight. If you're Ilia Topuria, I honestly can't think of another featherweight that I wouldn't want him to do that with, right? Anyone else, I'd go, yeah, Topuria probably wins it. Max, probably not. And to Holloway's chin, he stopped sparring probably 5 or 6 years ago at this
Hmm.
point, and it really seemed to help. Like I thought he was kind of punchy and losing it. He did an ESPN interview a long time ago where he seemed to do a lot of it, concussion stuff, and has came back real hard. I think there's something to that. The gloves are a good point. Probably doesn't submit Holloway. Holloway's an underrated grappler. Can he take him down and control him? Sure. Honestly, my biggest betting interest, other than it goes to a decision, is perhaps Holloway live. If Ilia really works for some of those takedowns and spends some energy early, and we get a better price on Max, if we can thread both those needles, I think that's where I'd be looking to do it. Will really be a as the fight's happening decision, though. I'm not coming in necessarily doing that. If we get a situation where it looks like Topuria spent a lot of energy grappling, that'll be the way I go with it.
Yeah, you brought up the point why I'm not laying Topuria on the money line. I think he is too big of an ego to grapple
Yep.
from the outset here. I do think he wants to strike with Max Holloway and prove that he's the better boxer. I think he may even be faster in addition to being
He
more
might be.
powerful, but Max is more experienced, certainly in the MMA cage. I think he has more tools. And I think the biggest advantage for Max in this fight, from a striking standpoint, is that Ilia probably isn't going to kick him much. He
Mhm.
struggled against Volkanovski's range because every time you step in kicking range with Volkanovski, he hits that inside kick. Topuria is more of a pure boxer. So if this is going to be more of a pure boxing fight, where Max is actually likelier to mix in knees and kicks and elbows, that all lends itself to the challenger and all lends itself to it being a closer fight. I think Topuria can break Max's pressure with takedowns, break it with grappling, clinching. That's where the advantages and the favoritism comes in. But if that ego is going to get in the way, if he's going to strike from the outset and not plan on grappling where he has the biggest advantage in this fight, everything pushes itself closer to the underdog. So don't disagree on the Holloway live angles. I would want to see Topuria grappling though in the first couple of
Okay.
rounds in order to execute that bet. I would want him expending energy. They're just standing at range, boxing, kickboxing. Topuria hasn't mixed in the grappling yet. I wouldn't do it just because he hasn't gone to his best possible game
Mhm.
plan yet. But if he has gone to it and Max has shown A, won't get submitted, B, can get back to his feet, or just C, I'm going to make you work a little bit, I'd be comfortable with the
Yeah.
Holloway live bet. Probably about a 10-minute mark. Is that where you jump in? 10-minute mark?
Somewhere in there, but and then the other thing to look out for is if one guy's price gets way better and a round that you think they won, which happens all the time, that's the other thing to jump in for. So if it's a very close first round, but Holloway is suddenly plus 400 or something, I'd probably pull the trigger early just on thinking I know better than the sports books at reading the judges. So that's the other factor. But yeah, 2 round after the second round is my main target.
Good stuff. Yeah, I'd certainly prefer if I'm going with the finish prop, I'd prefer Topuria by submission at plus 550 to his knockout prop at plus 210 against Max. Again, Max got knocked down for the first time against Gaethje, and then even for like 3 to 4 minutes after that, it seemed like the eyes were a little wide and he
Mhm.
was maybe coming back to it. And I was leaning to betting Topuria by knockout in this fight, but I'm gonna go with the prices. I'm gonna let the price dictate what I bet, and it goes to decision, the clear
Yeah.
value to me between these two guys who I consider exceptionally durable for the division, both of them.
And that
Fight of the
was
night?
up a weight class. And that was up a weight class against Gaethje, against one of the most powerful strikers at 155. So like, don't read too much into that when he's back at 145. Not that Ilia is not powerful, but he's not Justin Gaethje either. So
Absolutely.
there's that element.
Yeah, the power discrepancy was the biggest thing going against Max Holloway in that fight, and he ended up getting the knockout ultimately in one of the most thrilling finishes of all time. Our fight of the night. Hopefully, this fight can somewhat live up to that height. I think that Gaethje Holloway fight in hindsight has kind of been overrated. The overall fight, because Max
Yes.
was pretty one-sided, dominating that until he got knocked down in the fourth round. But the finish, can't beat that finish. Our fight of the night: Khamzat Chimaev minus 250 against Robert Whittaker plus 210. This is a 5-round non-title fight in the middleweight division. I would assume a title eliminator against the winner of DDP and Strickland, DDP Strickland 2. Khamzat, 4 years younger, 2 inches taller, 2-inch reach advantage, more powerful, very scary man. I think his odds to win by round one knockout at plus 650 have to be interesting. That's a very logical path to betting this fight. Khamzat round one or Khamzat round one KO into a Whittaker live bet after round one. I think that kind of plays into their likelier win conditions. We've seen Khamzat getting stretched out, showing lesser cardio. Now, what are the don't forget, Khamzat retired at one point after having COVID, was taking pictures of him throwing blood up in the sink. And then since he's come back from COVID, or since he's come back from those Instagram posts, unretired, right? His cardio hasn't been great. Now, we never really saw him extended even prior to that. So I don't know if this is what his gas tank always would have looked like, or if he's just a reduced athlete compared to what we previously expected. But if that fight against Kamaru Usman goes 5 rounds, Usman beats him, if not finishes him late. If that Gilbert Burns fight goes 5 rounds, Burns maybe beats him, if not finishes him late. So I think in a longer fight, Robert Whittaker, who's one of the best counter grapplers in the history of the division, has a huge chance to deny the positions that Khamzat wants to get to, outstrike him, and either win a decision or knock him out. That said, we've seen Rob struggle with physicality, and Khamzat is a monster for anybody, especially for 5 to 7 minutes. So his ability to get the takedown or get to dominant positions and land ground and pound like your Dricus Du Plessis did, or maybe finish the fight with a submission, all very viable, but I think only viable for the first 5 to 10 minutes. After that, I think it's Rob's fight. So Rob round four plus 2,000, Rob round five plus 2,200, Rob live. My favorite ways to bet this fight. If you want to have some Khamzat round one before that, I think it's worthy. And then the over 2.5 rounds, I think lends all of itself to Rob's win condition. This fight going at least 15 minutes, I think he takes over late. And I think this fight gets to at least the halfway point. It's a pick 'em price to go over 2.5. You're basically betting, in my opinion, on Rob to not get finished early. I don't think he sparks Khamzat in the first 2 rounds. Maybe he does, but I think it's less likely. Khamzat early, Rob late, Rob over, or I should say over 2.5, and then Rob live. The best ways, and Rob's late props 20 to 1, 22 to 1, respectively, round four, round five. Billy, I know you like Rob on the money line in this fight at plus 210. Any other prop considerations, though? Thoughts on the total? And then are you hedging it all with Khamzat early? How are you playing it beyond just Rob moneyline?
Beyond Rob Moneyline, I definitely am very interested in Whittaker live. That's, I think, probably the sharpest single bet. I'm trying to take into consideration this is going off early, especially for West Coast people. You might still be waking up even when we get to the main card here. So I don't want to rely too heavily on just live bets because this would be a bad podcast if you live in California or whatever. But we're seeing the fight the same way. I'm just convinced enough that Whittaker will survive those early storms that I want plus 210. I'm a little bit worried on the live that even if he loses the first round, if he survives, the books are going to be sharp enough to drop Whittaker's price. I don't know that that's the case. I have no idea what goes into making, a live MMA line other than just some guy taking his best guess. But that's a concern for me. Khamzat, not only did he struggle late against those fighters, those were both welterweights. And Usman took the fight on like 4 days' notice.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's fighting a decently sized middleweight, even though Whittaker used to fight 170 as well, who's got great cardio, very strong counter grappling, and all things considered, fairly durable chin. If you're trying to build a fighter that would make Khamzat look bad, it would look a lot like Robert Whittaker. Like that's what you'd be going for. And, also dealt with another illness the last time this fight was going to happen. I don't know how much of that is his cardio or just that's what we would have seen anyway. I'm leaning towards B just because he's a extremely big, strong guy who sells out for massive takedowns and dumps the whole tank trying to get him and swing at you. And if that doesn't work and that guy's still there, there's no plan B for Khamzat. We saw it against Gilbert Burns. It's like, Burns is still here. What do I do? And he got beat up starting in the second round there. That's the only reason, like I said, I'm a little bit nervous around Whittaker live. Don't be afraid to fire after the first round. Don't be afraid to fire during the first round if you see Whittaker get back up and you can deal with the lag. So I'm on Whittaker plus 210. That'll be half a unit. Trying to keep that other half a unit in reserve to find the best live betting time. If Khamzat sparks him in round one, it's a half unit. I'm not too worried about it. And then I've got tremendous upside if I can catch a big live number as well.
Let's move on to our favorite underdogs of the night. Your favorite underdog will pop up again later for me, but you're taking Armen Petrosyan at plus 145 against Shara Magomedov, aka Shara Bullet.
Yeah, Armen Petrosyan is the first highly credentialed striker who Shara Bullet is facing. I have not been impressed by Shara Bullet. I know the stuff he does looks cool, but he's almost point fighting out there. Like he's doing flashy kicks, but he's slapping you with his foot, not thudding you with your shin. Armin Petrosian, more decorated kickboxer, better at that, has been out there. And Petrosian will mix in a takedown every once in a great while, as we saw in his last fight. So pure striking match, I'd make this a coin flip in a pure striking match. Straight up -110 both ways. You mix in who I think has a little bit of grappling edge. That's also Petrosian. And yet we're getting +145. This was a luck ratings piece. I got him even better line earlier in the week. Really anything with a plus in front of it, I like it here. Been trying to find the times to find Shara Bullet. I think this is about as good of an opportunity as we're gonna get. And also the one you're gonna give out comes up later in mine too. So we got some nice agreement on the underdogs this week.
Yeah, you've got a prop on this fight. Carlos Leal at +185 against Renat Fakhretdinov. Leal on short notice in place of Nursultan Ruzaboyev, but he has great cardio. He's a really good striker. This guy's happy to go for all 15 minutes. He also seems like he's extremely strong. And this is a Russia versus Brazil fight, probably the two best regions for MMA in the world. If either of these guys were facing, as we joked about before, if either of these guys were facing a fighter from Canada, right, or a lesser credentialed MMA country, I'd probably be picking one automatically over the other. But I do think Renat's hype has sort of burnt out. We've seen what he can do, and he's very effective against the guys who can't deny takedowns or can't deny those grappling positions. But fighters like Nicholas Dalby, who are resilient, who are willing to fight back with him and get up and scramble, can absolutely push a pace against Renat and cause him to tire out late. So I think Leal pre-fight +185, absolutely. And even though he's on short notice, Leal live after round one, I think is worth an entry point too. Renat typically slows down after the first round. The takedowns do not come as easily. I think he's a bit of a weight bully. And I think even if he's getting takedowns here, Leal is going to have the chance to land enough damage to potentially steal a decision, even if he's getting out grappled. For the duration, Nicholas Dalby probably should have won that fight against Fakhretdinov, outstruck him in rounds 2 and rounds 3, ended up losing a split decision. I would imagine Fakhretdinov might have been in your luck ratings piece this week, Billy. I'm not sure if he was, just because this fight was up in the air and got jumbled around. But you like Leal round 3 or by decision at +360, so you certainly agree with the cardio angle. I would imagine you like him as a live bet as
Yes.
well. Tell me your thoughts on this fight.
Yeah, did not make the luck ratings. I don't think this fight was official when I was writing that because it came together late. So I agree with 100% of your analysis. I think Leal is actually the two fighters that Fakhretdinov has struggled with. He's got a draw and a split decision he didn't deserve are Elizeu Zaleski and Nicholas Dalby. Leal is kind of similar to both those guys. He's got good striking, fairly solid takedown defense, and he'll still be there later in the fight. I think the books have mispriced this late odds because Leal is coming in on short notice. The
Mhm.
round 3 or by decision is +360. Here's the thing, though. The fight he was scheduled to be in, he was supposed to fight this past Tuesday in Abu Dhabi when he got the call to come up to the UFC. So he is fighting 4 days later in the country he was already in. None of that short notice stuff applies here. And even the game plan stuff, if you watch a lot of Leal's PFL fights, people are trying to Renat Fakhretdinov him. They are trying to take him down and hold him there. He has weathered that. The only losses he has in like 10 years are to Sadabu Sai in PFL. Sai is huge, and Leal just couldn't get through that reach. Does not have that problem against Fakhretdinov. Live was actually my first read on this one. Then I looked and saw it as the very first fight of the card that is starting at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Anyone in any time zone west of us right now might not be up and ready to live bet that early. So putting a quarter unit on the round 3 and by decision at +360, hoping Fakhretdinov has a good first round and we can get similar odds on Leal's money line. Come back in on that and have some big juicy prices coming into it. But yeah, 100% agree with your analysis on the fight in general.
Good stuff. Another fight that we're in agreement on, Mateusz Rebecki. This has always been a pro Mateusz Rebecki podcast. He's going against Murtabek Oralbai. Oralbai is a bit of a weight bully, too, in my opinion. 3 inches taller, 8-inch reach advantage. Rebecki, very outsized here, but I do think he's the more skilled fighter. And I'm not confident in either guy's cardio, which is actually a plus for Rebecki because Rebecki lost his last fight getting out cardioed. And he has like a very power oriented game. Everything he does, he powers into all of his techniques. But Oralbai's size, I think, sort of neutralizes the cardio
Mhm.
advantage in this fight. So I think both of us are expecting a more competitive fight than the money line indicates. I lean to the goes to decision of plus 108, even though this may have a chaotic pace, but we both like Rambechki plus 3.5 points at plus money. Billy, go ahead and give me your analysis on this fight.
Yeah, I mean, both these guys, they just do too much. Like, they fight like bantamweights for a round, and then they go, oh no, I'm 170 pounds and out of gas. I can't do that for 15 minutes. Rumbetsky was just mauling everyone until the end of the first round of his last fight against Carlos Diego Fajeda, where he kind of fell apart. Oralby has done that so far. I honestly think Oralby is going to have his Rumbetsky moment, for lack of a better term here, when he doesn't put a guy away right away or dominate him early. Then he's like, now what do I do? My lean here is that either Rombetsky fights like he always does and has a high chance of winning the first round, which helps him cover plus 3.5. Or even better, he has learned some lessons from emptying his tank early, fights with a little bit more measured pace, and can, win a round or two late, if not the fight outright. So I like Rombetsky plus 3.5 at plus 110. I'm splitting between that and his money line. I think there's some value on his money line as well. I like to do half a unit on each. That way you make a very slight profit if he wins a round and pretty hefty profit if he wins the fight outright. So yeah, similar views as you. It almost seems like Oralby is the future Rombetsky, right? He just hasn't had that moment where he's been tested hard and his cardio gets exposed. Almost was last fight against Elvis Brenner, but not quite.
Yeah, you look at back at the line history for Rambechki too, big favorite in all of his UFC fights, pretty much. Like I think there's been a market overcorrection in this fight. I do think the size is a big factor. I think aesthetically, it's not going to look good. Like when they get in the cage, you're going to go, oof, why did I bet on the guy who's a full weight division smaller? But I do think he'll make this fight competitive. I think I'd prefer to split the Rumbetsky plus 3.5 with the GTD at plus 108
Yeah.
as opposed to his money line. What are your thoughts on the total in this fight? Because as you said, they both do a lot. They both tire out quickly.
Mhm.
Do you think a finish is likelier early when they're both doing a lot, or do you think it's likelier later when one of them is maybe a little bit less tired than the other?
I'm leaning that if there is a finish, it's almost immediately because both guys are
Mm-hmm.
just so explosive. Rombetsky is not a good technical striker, but he is an elite grappler. He's, won European championships at Nogi, multiple IBJJF, Poland titles. And he knows you don't want to take him down because you don't want to engage him there. So he just wings stuff as hard as he can. That's not going to be there in round three because as hard as he can won't be that hard. Oralby, kind of similar, right? He faded real heavily in round three against Elf Brenner. Probably deserved to lose that fight. Got away with some fence grabs, got penalized for one. That was the whole thing. So I think both guys are far more dangerous early. They both are good enough grapplers where you're not going to get that late submission. I think they're just technical enough that they'll be able to avoid that. So a live goes to a decision if we get a chaotic first round and you can find those markets. That's also another way to look at it.
Yeah, I like to get that analysis because that influences whether I would bet the over 1.5 or the goes to decision, right?
Mhm.
If we think a later finish
If
is
it gets to one and
likelier,
a half, yeah.
but if we think the finish is either going to come early or not at all, take the GTD. That even occurs sometimes in main events or other fights where you'll get a huge number on the GTD prop and the over 1.5 is like a pick 'em, and you're like, well, if the finish is going to come, it's going to come under that 1.5 round. So why would I bet the minus 110 over 1.5 when I could get the huge number on the GTD? Yeah, just
Mhm.
something worth thinking about. Most of these fights, most finishes, I think 65% of finishes occur in round one. So if you don't think that finish is going, or if you think the finish is likelier to come early, but you don't expect it to come, bet the GTD prop more
Yeah.
often than not than the overs. It's a sweat for those final 5 minutes, 7.5 minutes, but more than often than not, the better price. We've each got a couple more props that we like for Saturday's card. I'll let you round out the main card because I think we covered all the other fights on the main card so far. Oh no, we're gonna finish up covering the last fight on the main card, but Magomed Ankalaev inside the distance plus 200 against Alexander Rakic. Tell me why you're taking Ankh ITD.
Yeah, because he's a minus 400 or so favorite against a guy who's been finished in his last two fights. His body is failing him and doesn't have a great chin. I have no idea why the line is that wide. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Those things should be closer. And we've got the motivation from Ankalaev. Should have already gotten a title fight. Needs to kind of put a stamp on one to make sure he gets the next one. It's just too big of a gap between his money line, especially at a heavier weight class where knockouts are more likely. Kind of reminds me of our analysis on Brian Ortega for the last couple fights, where like this guy might just be broken. So even if the skills are there, the body isn't. I could see that being the case here.
It takes two to finish, and Alexander Rakic very willing to be finished, especially his last fight against Yuri Prochazka. I bet
Yeah.
Rakic, you bet Prochazka. I know you were sweating for the first two rounds of that fight, but the tempo that Rakic was fighting at, one was awesome. It created a super entertaining fight.
Mhm.
But that's the kind of tempo that's going to make Magomed Ankalaev actually fight back, right? He's going to force him to fight. He's actually going to force him to do things. The problem with Ankalaev's recent opponents, they've been too content to just stand there and have a staring contest with him. They haven't forced grappling exchanges or like made Ankalaev do anything. That's why the
Yeah.
UFC is getting pissed off at him and hasn't put him in a title picture, even though he might be the best or light heavyweight on the planet. His only loss remains a very questionable final second submission to Paul Craig, where he dominated the entire fight and then tapped out via triangle with 1 second remaining on the clock. So Ankalaev has basically won or tied for all but 1 second of his UFC career. And I do think he would be a very, very severe test
Yeah.
for Alex Pereira if he decides to grapple. However, I don't know if you've seen in the interviews, Billy, he thinks he can outstrike Alex Pereira. So, no.
Does he though, or is he just saying that until he gets a title fight? You
You
know?
know, with Magomed Ankalaev, I tend to believe he thinks he can outstrike Alex Pereira, and they're going to get in the cage, and we're all going to bet Magomed at a nice, juicy plus number, and he's going to eat a check left hook and die. So I really look forward to that fight coming down the line. He just has bad fight IQ. He never
Yeah.
pursues his likeliest path to victory, but I think Rakic is reckless enough to put
Mhm.
himself in dangerous positions in this fight. So I agree with you. Ankalaev inside the distance at plus 200, I think definitely worth a look. My longer shot prop, like, don't love RDA by decision of plus 500. If he's going to win this fight, it's likely by decision or submission. I don't see Jeff Neal getting submitted. The path is there based on what Neil Magny did to Jeff Neal, but Jeff Neal was coming off of long COVID, I believe himself, or he had some sort of illness that he had been dealing with.
Yeah.
He lost to Wonder Boy. He lost to Magny. He looked like crap in both of those fights. His takedown defense looked much better against Shavkat. I think Jeff Neal is back to like his physical prime, I guess, or like as close as he can be to his physical prime. I don't think he was physically all there when he fought Magny, when he fought Wonder Boy. Maybe RDA can grapple him, win this fight, just with takedowns and control. He's also turning 40 years old tomorrow. So 40th birthday present for RDA winning by decision? Maybe. Plus 500, I think, is the way to bet him if you're betting this fight at all. Maybe Neal inside the distance. Do you have any thoughts on Neal versus RDA?
I like the decision prop. It's kind of I don't have a strong feeling on who's going to win, but if he wins, that's how it's going to happen. So to get a better price is kind of, if you want to bet that one, that's how I would do it.
Yeah, RDA moving up permanently now to 170. It seems like he's 3 inches shorter, 5 inch reach discrepancy. Neal's the bigger fighter, likely to deny the takedowns, but if he doesn't, RDA could
Yeah.
ride him for 3 rounds. Absolutely win a decision of 5-1. I'll probably put a tenth of a unit on that. Nothing crazy. Our best bets. I'm going to go back to Armin Petrosyan, which Billy talked about earlier. Is Shara just MVP with worse hands? Maybe.
That
He's
better
more
kicks worse.
durable, I'd say, right? I think Shara's durable. I think the likelihood that this fight goes to decision, the likelihood that we get screwed by split decision, betting Petrosyan here is decently high. Petrosyan plus 3.5 points at minus 175 seems automatic to me.
Mhm.
How does he not win a round here without getting finished? I think he's the better MMA fighter overall. I think he has the better hands. He checks kicks, which have Shara's any of recent opponents check kicks at all? So I just think Petrosyan over the past 3 years, 4 years, however long he's been in the UFC, maybe the most consistently underrated fighter. And it's because he's constantly facing grapplers and people underrate his grappling defense. Well, he can grapple here offensively. He did it against Christopher Leroy Duncan. He has the grappling upside in this fight. I think he has the better gas tank. I like Petrosyan pre-fight at plus 145. I like his point spread at plus 3.5. I'd lay that up to minus 200. And I like him live after round one. Armin Petrosyan across the board, my best bet this week. You're going with Bruno Ferreira at plus 120 against Abus Magomedov. Abus 4 inches taller, 6 inch reach advantage. Bruno, though, has finished all of his opponents inside of round one. Guy is absolutely killer power. This is a fun fight. I think I'd be on the other side from you, but talk me off of betting Abus Magomedov. Why do you like Ferreira?
Well, I don't want to totally talk you off betting Abus Magomedov because I do want to come back in live on him if Bruno does not get the early finish.
Okay.
Basically, both guys want to strike. Abus is longer and more technical. Bruno has way more power. He just when he hits people, they stay hit, as they say. They do not come back up. I've had a lot of success betting Bruno. Fajeda took him on short notice with a first round knockout in his debut. That went well. his power is just so much more than Magomedov's, and Magomedov got knocked out by Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland is a great fighter. He is the only person that Sean Strickland has even knocked down in the last like 11 fights, and Strickland knocked him out. Caio Bahaio knocked him down. Caio is a better overall fighter than Bruno Ferreira. Ferreira has way more power. So I like coming in with a pre-fight ticket on Bruno Ferreira. For full disclosure, I bet this before props were available, and I'm probably going to throw another quarter unit or something on his round one. And then if he beats Abus up or lands a couple big shots but doesn't finish him, we come back live on Magomedov. My bigger concern here is that Magomedov remembers he can grapple.
Yeah.
I'm hoping he doesn't. If he does, we have no idea what Fade is going to look like on the ground. We haven't really seen it yet. He has the athletic ability. I think he can kind of just muscle his way out of some early takedown attempts, but that's another one. If you got to do it in round 2 and round 3, that is not a great plan. So I want to come in with a pre-fight ticket on Fajeda. We'll add a little bit of round 1, and then we can kind of balance our exposure a little bit, hopefully get plus money on all sides and make a profit either way.
Yeah, Magomedov by round 1 submission at plus 950 has to be an interesting look. If he does grapple right away, that will absolutely be a live ticket. Magomedov to win in round 2 at plus 600 or round 3 at 10-1 have to be interesting as well. You mentioned Ferreira round 1. You can get as high as plus 430. That would certainly be a poke. You could just play this fight straight up. Ferreira round 1 plus 430 into a Magomedov live bet. You could try to play all 3 round props. Ferreira round 1, Magomedov round 2, round 3. I would probably wait for the Magomedov live line or just bet his pre-fight money line. I do like his grappling upside. I think he's taller and longer. I like his teep kick to keep Ferreira off of him. That loss to Strickland, obviously the cardio did not pan out well, but I think going back to the fight that I just talked about with Varan Bechki, where the cardio on both sides isn't great, I think the cardio not being great on either side here actually helps Magomedov because it makes things a little bit more neutral. I think Ferreira's win condition is the same as it is in any fight. Wins early or likely fades a little bit down the stretch. Magomedov, as I know I mentioned the round 1 sub prop. I think his sub prop is live in any round, honestly. As Ferreira tires out, as Magomedov decides to grapple, the submission upside should be there. I'm probably not betting into finish props, though. We'll probably just target either the round props or Magomedov's money line or Magomedov's live line. Billy, I think we touch on most of the fights on this card. Any other fights you want to talk about before we get out of here?
Real quick, Ivo Aslan versus Rafael Cerqueira, newcomer, new to the promotion. Cerqueira's flipped to being a favorite here. If that keeps going, I kind of like Aslan. Just kind of just to fade the public on trends like that. That's pretty profitable long run. Both guys can crack. I don't know much about either of them. Aslan only ever lost to Anton Turkali, and then he got revenge in a violent fashion in his last fight. I don't really see why either guy should have a plus in front of his name here. So if we get a better price on Ebo, that's the one I'm looking at. Anything else? Oh, we didn't hit on Kennedy and the Chuck Wu versus Chris Barnett. Just enjoy that one, guys. Don't try to risk actual hard-earned dollars on that because it's going to be a mess. But it'll be fun.
Yeah, I was thinking with regard to Aslan and Cerqueira. Aslan opened as a minus 180 favorite, I believe, at DraftKings, and now he's all the way up to plus money. Yeah, minus 180 was his opening line. Minus 150 was the consensus opening line. So I'm happy to take the big price adjustment. Fights like this where we don't have a ton of information on either guy, I think the opening lines are relatively efficient, and I think that's why we see CLV blow up so much in MMA all the time, because I think opening lines are relatively efficient. Closing lines are more reflective of groups releasing plays and people piling on, and then continuing to pile on past the point where it was recommended you bet the line too. So just be wary of MMA CLV. I feel like every time I have CLV against Billy, it is a curse and I lose my bet automatically. That'll do it though for our UFC betting preview on the Action Network YouTube channel. You can find more of our betting content for both Billy and myself on actionnetwork.com and in the Action Network app. Make sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Action Pro. You can access our projections and receive quicker bet notifications from all of our experts using promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off of an annual subscription. Best of luck with all of your bets this weekend. Enjoy UFC 308. For Billy Ward, I'm Sean Zerillo. Enjoy the violence. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.